Hello, everyone. I welcome you to yet another session on V.S. Naipaul's novel, A House for Mr. Biswas. We are happy to continue the discussion. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about the ideas of space and movement in the novel, uh, in the light of the author's diasporic sensibility. So today, I would like to reflect on the different aspects of the word diaspora and uh, how is it connected to this particular novel that we are reading. As we know that V.S. Naipaul is twice removed from the country of his ancestors, India. So if we say that he is an Indian by ancestry, then he's Trinidadian by birth and he's British by education. Having had to negotiate multi-locality in the construction of his own identity, it is but natural that he portrays a figure of unanchored, estranged individual in the character of Mohan Biswas. And I would like to begin from that point. If we look at the word diaspora in Greek, it is constituted of the words dia and spirine. Dia means across and spirine means to scatter. So if we look at the components of this word, we would understand that any work whose author belongs to the category of diaspora would, of course, create a world where there would be literal or metaphorical reference to people on the move. And that is something which we see very clearly in the journey of Mohan Biswas. In the novel, the events are portrayed in such a way that the finality of the concepts of home and away from home, both these concepts are questioned, the finality of these concepts. And if we look at the journey of Mohan Biswas from a place in rural Trinidad, which is considered the place of his origin, his father's house, from which he had to move after his father's drowning in the pond, along with his family. So from that place, which is, I think, called the Parrot Trace, from that place to Pagotis, from Pagotis to Arvakas, from there to the Chase, then the Green Vales, then for some time in the port of Spain, not in his own house, but in a house belonging to the Tulsis, then again to Short Hills, then finally to his own house at Port of Spain. So this journey is important because we see that Mohan Biswas never really settles down. And his dream of belonging to a particular place is always partially fulfilled. It is never complete, even till the end. It is partially fulfilled because, after his illness, when he comes back to his house at Port of Spain, he questions his role in the idea of that house, the people in that house. He questions how much actually he belongs to that particular house, whether he deserves that house at all, and whether his place is a permanent one. You see, of course, illness and the prospect of death, it makes us consider a lot of things about permanence. But if we look at it in the light of the diasporic experience, we will understand that In such an experience, the identities will always be, changing, or we can say the identities will be rediscovering themselves. So an individual is never sure about his or her spot in a particular scheme of things. And that is something which happens to, Mohan Biswas. Now, if we look at the idea of diaspora, and if you want to understand how post-colonial critics have looked at this word, we would see that, Ashcroft and Griffiths and Tiffin, where they talk about particular terms related to the condition of post-coloniality, they have actually highlighted that diaspora can be of three kinds. One is the diaspora of settlement, where Europeans, they have traveled to different places in order to settle there and rule. Okay. This kind of settlement for the purposes of colonization. And then the diasporas of slavery and indenture, which actually arises out of the need for providing cheap labor in plantation colonial economies. And then we have the third category, which is also interesting, a diaspora of casualization, which refers to people who migrate from marginalized places to cosmopolitan or metropolitan places, just in search of a better life. What does better life mean? That varies from individual to individual, and that is why it is a term to be contested and to be debated. But if we look at the journey of Mohan Biswas from that space in rural Trinidad, his first home, to the cosmopolitan environment of the port of Spain, where it is interesting that he belongs to a community, but that community, again, is not definite. I mean, there are Indians in port of Spain, but they are Indians as distant from their origin as Mohan Biswas is. Or we can say that there is a kind of hybrid space. We know about the concepts of hybridity in post-colonial discourse. But that is a sort of hybrid space where there is no anxiety to go towards something unifying. People are satisfied with, Indians, the quality of Indianness, having differences within a particular community. So it is like reaching somewhere, but then being content with what that place offers is a matter of, self-questioning, questioning oneself, whether I have reached where I intended to. So here we see that in the context of the novel, we will see that this diaspora of casualization is more, in picture, though the novel begins with a memory of indenture. And let me just read out one line from the first chapter after the prologue, that is pastoral. Bipti's father, we are talking about the father of Mohan Biswas's mother, Bipti. Bipti's father, futile with asthma, propped himself up on a string bed and said, as he always did on unhappy occasions, "Fate, there is nothing we can do about it." No one paid him any attention. Fate had brought him from India to the sugar estate, aged him quickly, and left him to die in a crumbling mud hut in the swamplands. Yet he spoke of fate often and affectionately, as though merely by surviving he had been particularly favored. So from the beginning, there is this evocation of the memory of indenture, because of which, a family had to move from India to the Caribbean. Now, if we look at how Mohan Biswas left his first home, and if we read that description, the last paragraph of the first chapter, when his father has died, and then the circumstances force Dipti and her children to move to different places where the photograph that they have with their dead father becomes the last portrait of a family, which is united, because after that they all split up, and the concept of a family is questioned again and again. And so Mr. Biswas came to leave the only house to which he had some right. For the next 35 years, he was to be a wanderer with no place he could call his own, with no family, except that which he was to attempt to create out of the engulfing world of the Tulsis. For with his mother's parents dead, his father dead, his brothers on the estate at Felicity, Dehuti as a servant in Tara's house, and himself rapidly growing away from Bipti, who, broken, became increasingly useless and impenetrable, it seemed to him that he was really quite alone. This state of being alone does not leave him even towards the end of his story. And I would say that in between, the journey he has made through all these years also shows us how, in a diasporic vision, of course, space would involve physical movement, but space also involves the movement of the mind and the movement in one's understanding of social units, such as family. And, in a particular article or book, Stuart Hall, the critic, says that diaspora identities are those which are constantly producing and reproducing themselves anew through transformation and difference. Okay, that is something we have seen. But then we also should look at the ideas of the French philosopher and sociologist Henri Lefebvre, who says that the theory of space should be a unitary theory that sees a unity between the fields of the physical, mental, and the social. And here I would like to talk a little bit about the Canadian Mission School, which Mohan Biswas enters, and which gives him his first formal education under the tutelage of Lal. It is interesting that in those descriptions, we will find a kind of hybrid space, a mixture of the tradition of, let us say, colonial books such as George V Hindi Reader or the Royal Reader. Okay. And we would also find how these subjects, history, geography, and whatever were taught in those subjects were alien to the students, and how they perceived it. And how Lal, the teacher, who was himself a lower caste Hindu, converted into Presbyterianism, how he interpreted all these books and how he conveyed the ideas to the students. And we have someone like Alec, who does his little experiment with Dodd's kidney pills. But Dodd's kidney pills are specific to a time in the Trinidadian society, which had become successful at a time, and a type of patent medicine that enjoyed popularity in Trinidad during 1920s and 40s. And also the mention of Dodd's Almanac, which includes, in addition to jokes, the success stories of people who had been cured with the help of Dodd's kidney pills, and their photographs and their sharing of experiences related to this. So I see that particular school as a sort of mixing ground, as a coming together of spaces where, of course, there is physical displacement, and there is the need to assimilate those who have been displaced, assimilate the less fortunate. That is the whole purpose of the Canadian mission schools, and that is something we need to look more upon, I think, the purpose of these schools, how these schools operated. But I also see it as a point where Mohan Biswas starts questioning his understanding of everything, his understanding of culture, his understanding of, let us say a poem like Bingen on the Rhine, which he read in that book, Bell's Standard Elocutionist. And it is interesting that, towards the end of his time spent at that school, because we know that Tara pulled him out of that school and wanted him to get training to be a Pandit. So he was no more to be at that school. But how he, could not really return that copy of Bell's Standard Elocutionist, and how that book traveled with him wherever he went, and ultimately it found a place in that cabinet of books in his home in Port of Spain. So this also tells us how, whenever we talk about the diaspora experience, there is not just the movement of, one's identities, the movement, the physical movement, the movement of minds, and the movement of, concepts like families, identities, all these things, but it also includes the movement of these, very, what can we say, objects which stand for or which have in them cultural histories. We can say political artifacts which carry memories of a particular era, how they also move, and they also define what the diasporic experience is going to be like. So these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. And I would like the discussion to continue at this point. And I would like to call Pragya to talk about some of her thoughts on the novel.
Thank you, Shatrapa. It's interesting that you mentioned diaspora and hybrid culture, because that was what struck me in my reading of Biswas, Mr. Biswas, A House for Mr. Biswas these days, like the names and the transformation that they have undergone because of migration. Look at the writers, the author's name, Vidya, Vidya, whereas in India, if we write Vidya, Vidya, we say, but it is Vidya. Like, that's how it happens when people migrate. Names also undergo a change, like according to the climb, according to the pronunciation, which is easier for the place, in the place where they have migrated to, the name also undergoes a change. Prasad, instead of Prasad, it is Persad. And Mohan Biswas also, the name is quite interesting because it is Mohun instead of Mohan. It's a very colonial spelling, don't you think? Because it's like when the British, they wanted to say Mohan, the short sound, but cut, hut, shut. So Mohan, but we say Mohan, Mohan. So it's Mohun, Mohan Biswas. So I found it very interesting. Also, Shyama, instead of Shyama, it is Shama. Right. So those names have undergone a change, and it shows how, like, instead of saying that, okay, somehow the original pronunciation or the spelling or the form has undergone a disfigurement, or, it has been tampered with, it is better to understand that maybe something else has been added to the original by the act of migration, by the change in their circumstances, because of the transformed name. It tells a story of its own. It tells that the person is no longer in India. Now that person has an extra home, let's say, rather than a changed home, a new home. Let's say he has a home in India as well as in Trinidad. It's only when you go to the second or third line of the novel that you realize that even though the name is Indian, it's not a story set in India. When you come upon the Trinidad Herald, then you know, okay, maybe this is a story outside India about a migrant experience. So that is something which I found very interesting. Also, what else? Yeah, another point that I found interesting was is connected to what you said about space. I looked at how he described the his house and the individual pieces of furniture, the like the things in his house. The every article and piece of furniture in his house is cherished, and it has a heritage, it has a history. He describes it so lovingly. Upon his release, his discharge from the hospital, the cabinet of books which you mentioned, it's not just, not just brought to for his convenience, but rather it's got an emotion attached to it. And it makes you dwell upon the word accommodate. It says, the novel says, he felt accommodated. So what is being accommodated? Accommodated is not just the creation of space for you, but when you are commodified in a way that you are not undergoing, you are not undergoing a change according to the commodity that you possess, but you are also orienting your space according to the things that you choose to associate with yourself. Your things, the furniture, your possessions, they tell their own story about you, which I found very touching. It's a materialism, but it's a very emotional sort of materialism. So like, it's stories recalled by him. He calls it a rediscovery. He bought it, yeah, he discovered it, but now when he returns to them, and they are like family, right? So he calls it a rediscovery. These are no longer objects but familiars and family. Let's talk about the word familiar. Familiar is, yeah, when you say, I'm familiar with something, I know it, I'm acquainted with it, it's not strange to me. But familiar in another sense is also used for those creatures which are associated with witches and wizards. Sorcerers, they have a crow or a tadpole or a cat with them, and that animal is called a familiar. And that is also the sense which I found in this novel. All his things, somehow they have become his horcruxes. They've imbibed a bit of his personality. But when the world is trying to modify Mohan Biswas according to its dictats and its expectations, he is also, in his tiny little way, he's also trying to tell his own stories, that, see, this is what I am. No matter how much you try to change me, this is what I am. These are the things I possess, and this is what I like to be. So, like, it's a constant. These things are his constant companions. They stay in his psyche, and like they also, change the way he behaves and the way he is, the way he likes to project his identity to the world. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya. That was really interesting. I did not know about that connotation of the word familiar, but it's really interesting the way you brought in that idea, and also the idea of Horcruxes as, not just that those particular artifacts, they carry his memories, I mean, cultural memories or the memories of a certain place where he had been. But they also carry bits of Mohan Biswas in them. So that is a very interesting idea that you brought in. And also the idea that was interesting that, you spoke about the word accommodation. Yes, I would just like to read the ending of prologue in this context when, he realizes that how important it was to have his own house, no matter how, unsatisfactory it was, or, uh, how uncomfortable it could be at times. How terrible it would have been at this time to be without it, to have died among the tulsis, amid the squalor of that large, disintegrating, and indifferent family, to have left Shama and the children among them in one room. Worse, to have lived without even attempting to lay claim to one's portion of the earth, to have lived and died as one had been born, unnecessary and unaccommodated. And I would like to talk a little bit about how important this word unaccommodated is in the context of, the experience of diaspora. When you lose touch with a place of your origin, then no matter where you are, no matter what kind of an identity you find yourself shaping, there will be that sense of not being accommodated. Because, when the place where we spend our early childhood, somehow, the time that we spent with our mothers, being cared for, and, where our little childhood fancies are taken care of, and we have that kind of a cozy environment. Somehow, even if we ask ourselves, if we look at the modern world and understand that, hypermobility has become the reality. We are always on the move. And if we stay at one place for a long time, we feel there is something wrong with us. Something like that, that has become the necessary condition of the modern times. You have to move. You have to, even if it does not involve, physical movement, you have to move across digital spaces at least. So that movement has to be there. So in that context, if we try to understand, the anxiety of not being accommodated, I think that is somewhere related to the time when Mohan Biswas had to leave his childhood house, the house where he had spent his childhood, where he was really a child without, the burdens of mm, a fractured family, let us say. So if we compare it to the experience of the diaspora, no matter, we see that, V.S. Naipaul himself was not actually born in India. He was born in Trinidad. So in a sense, we can say that Trinidad was the place where, his childhood would be spent, and that was the place to which he would belong. But whenever he writes about India in his, travel experiences, when he writes about India, when he goes back to India, he somehow feels connected to it. Obviously, because of the traditions that have been in his families, the families I say this in plural because it is not just about one family, but about family within a family, and those kinds of concepts that he has had to deal with throughout the expanse of the novel. So yes, this word is very important, and I would also like to highlight how the concept of return is important in the experience of the diaspora. There has to be a return, but whether one wants to return to claim that original identity is a matter of question. Whether we really want to be that original thing, whatever the original would mean. But there is not always the urge to return in that way. But of course, there will be the urge to return to that space where one began one's life, like where he at least got the idea of being Indian or Indianness, you know, to try to return to that time, not in the sense that he wanted to come back to India, or he wanted to belong to India exclusively, or he wanted to be among Indians in that sense, but to return, to return in a metaphorical sense. And here I would like to just read a little bit about Mohan Biswas's return to his, childhood house. Mr. Biswas could never afterwards say exactly where his father's hut had stood or where Dhari and the others had dug. He never knew whether anyone found Raghu's money. It could not have been much since Raghu earned so little, but the ground did yield treasure. The ground, had become, I mean, it was found to be rich with oil, and it was full of pumps, and it was that expression where it is said that it was full of oil derricks. Okay. But the last part of that page where he says that his grandparents' house had also disappeared, and the place where his navel string was buried, and that sixth finger which had come off, it was buried. All that place he could not get back to. He could not return. He has returned, but actually he cannot tell where his family home was. That space is completely changed. The pond had been drained, the pond where he lost his father. First he lost the calf and then his father. The pond had been drained, and the whole swamp region was now a garden city of white wooden bungalows with red roofs, cisterns on tall stilts, and neat gardens. The stream where he had washed the black fish had been dammed, diverted into a reservoir, and its winding, irregular bed covered by straight lawns, streets, and drives. The world carried no witness to Mr. Biswas's birth and early years. And this was something I found very beautiful and very touching in the journey of the protagonist of this novel. Those are the thoughts.
Can I mention gender here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I found it very interesting that mostly our media and literature and our cartoons, they portray the woman's equation with her in-laws way more than a man's equation with his in-laws, which I found very, very sweet and funny. It really struck me when he was responding to his niece-in-law when she was criticizing. Look at Shama's emotions. Like, she's happy that they've gotten a house, and she's a little miffed that she was not consulted. And yet she's ready to take compliments from her relatives, her family, that, okay, you've finally gotten a home, you've become big, you've arrived in society. And she knows the indirect taunt in it, and she's trying to disclaim, and no, I have not been consulted in it. And like, okay, she's like, without offending her husband, and She's like trying to be very, very humble and nonchalant about it. And he overhears it, Mohan Biswas overhears it, and he's like irritated. It's like a lightning strike of, resentment towards his niece, with whom his terms were not good anyway. And it struck me how, like, a man's relation with his in-laws is so often portrayed so little. Like, and how are the in-laws supposed to treat their son-in-law? Like, are they, the affection, the respect has to be just right. Because if it is overdone, then it will appear very false. And if it is underdone, then he will be offended, he will feel neglected. So it has to be just right in order to, strike the correct note, which I found very interesting, because that is not at all followed in this novel. They treat their sons-in-law, the Tulsi family, they're like very matter of fact about their sons-in-law. Okay, they're like, okay, a new recruit into the family bandwagon. I found that very interesting. Thank you.
True, true. Even, Mohan Biswas had to marry Shama because he had written that love note and he was made to marry her. And then he was trapped. That is the word
Yeah,
he
that
uses.
love note was Desdemona's handkerchief in this novel. So he was trapped.
True. I mean, how such, very deep sensibilities together with um, that depth, we also see the pull of humor throughout this novel. And if we begin talking about the humor, I mean, it is a different sort of experience. And I think we need another session to talk about the humor in this novel. And that would be lovely, I think, apart from, the
You know,
anxieties and the pains of being
yeah.
displaced and
His reaction to his niece reminded me of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, where there was this Mrs. Jennings who was a loudmouth, and her interaction with her son-in-law. You remember him? Like, he was such a laconic, very, very. He didn't talk much, and he used to hide himself behind a newspaper, and he would come out with a "Yes, dear," like totally sarcastic. It was it was lovely, and this reminded me of it, that at least Mr. Biswas gets to talk his mind.
true. Yes, so it was really nice talking to you, Pragya, about the experiences of reading this novel, because it's
Yeah.
such a huge novel. Of course, while reading the words, we have many thoughts, but it's always good when we are able to, share those thoughts and we talk about them. Gives us a
Yeah, and
different
good
experience.
thing about these sessions is we can take as much time as we want to dwell
Yes,
as
yes.
long as we like about the novel.
True. I mean, as long as we have thoughts, we can go on talking about a particular text. I mean, it's really interesting. And I hope that in the next session, we will get to listen to, more people on how this novel has inspired them, or what are the emotions that this novel has inspired them in them.
So many members, so many people, so many thoughts. Like, it'll be fun.
Okay, then let us wind up today's session. It was lovely to talk to you, Pragya. Thank you.
Thank
Yes,
you, Shatarupa.
thank you. Now I would ask the viewers to wait for our next session. I am waiting for it. Until then, keep reading. Thank you. Bye bye.